During his latest State of the Nation, South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa said his country needs fundamental changes to revive economic growth by tackling corruption and endemic poverty, inequality and unemployment deepened by chronic power cuts and COVID-19. He mentioned some of the many troubles that have plagued Africa's most industrialized nation in the past decade. President Ramaphosa singled out its unreliable electricity power supply as one of the biggest threats to long-term prosperity. South Africa has struggled to reverse the economic inequalities that are the main legacy of white minority rule, struggling to provide the jobs needed to lift millions out of poverty. As of the third quarter of 2021, the latest data available, South Africa had a 34.9% unemployment rate, one of the highest unemployment rates in the world. In his sixth State of the Nation address, the president pledged to leave no one behind. There were pledges and promises made and plans outlined to put the country back on the path of economic prosperity. Today, our focus is on South Africa as the president charts a new course with the State of the Nation address. This is Business Edge. I'm Tolulope. Adeleru-Balogun. Welcome. And joining me from Johannesburg, South Africa is Professor Bonang Mohale. He is the president of Business Unity South Africa. Prof, good morning, or rather good afternoon, because it is afternoon South African time. Welcome to Business Edge. Hello, Prof, can you hear me? Let's try one more time. Hello, Prof, are you there? All right, having some connection issues there, but my guest, as I said, is hopefully joining me today from Johannesburg, South Africa, Professor Bonang Mohale. He is the president of Business Unity South Africa. Prof, are you with me now?
Yes, I'm here with you.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's only a pleasure, my dear sister. I apologize for the connectivity issues, but like
no problem.
I can hear you loud and clear.
Fantastic. Let's go straight to it. One thing I want us to start with is this was President Cyril Ramaphosa's sixth State of the Union address, and excluding the issue that COVID brought about, was there anything particularly different in the speech than the 5 other States of the Nation addresses that he has given?
So again, I'll just, so that you can still hear me well, right?
Yes, I can. Please go ahead.
Thank you so much, my dear brother. I think for us it was different in many ways because as business, we asked the president to focus on implementation and execution on the framework that is required to get out of this quagmire. We said he must focus on the process. He needed to look at the structure, the resources, the deliverables with very explicit timelines and final accountability. So in order to achieve regulatory certainty and policy stability in the context of the lowest level of confidence, hope and trust since the Second World War, what we need more than anything else is a new social compact or a grand pact that we needed to implement the Zondo Commission report number 1 and number 2 recommendation. Also implement the expert panel's July insurrection report recommendation, and then conclude and finalize the appointment of the Chief Justice process. But most importantly, we already have another economic plan called the Economic Reconstruction and Recovery Plan, and we said you need to execute on that, share with the nation where we are compared to the same period last year and what are we going to do in the next 100 days. It touches on things like infrastructure investment, fixing Transnet and our metro rail because that takes the majority of our people to and from work, address the issue of government capacity, but most importantly, the issue of small and medium enterprises development. We asked the president to complete the vaccine rollout and address this notion of hesitancy to urgently address the single biggest systemic and systematic risk, which is youth unemployment, and of course, prioritize economic growth, because if the economy is not growing, very soon we'll be talking about the redistribution of poverty, not the redistribution of wealth. As business, we said, when we create jobs, it's not in and of itself. It's about creating the markets of the future, because there's a problem when your own employees can't afford the goods and services that you produce.
Okay.
Last week we said, President, you have to focus on transformation. This economy must look typically like South Africans. Yes, my sister?
Okay, let me ask, because you mentioned the Zondo Commission, and we've been following that very closely here at News Central. The president promised to ensure that everything is done so that the issues that led to the state capture controversy would not repeat themselves. So we've had the first 2 of the 3 reports that were released in January and February. How certain are you, given that, of course, the president was vice president under Jacob Zuma, who seems to be the main focus of the state capture and the Zondo Commission, that there will be those very needed, deliberate, and intense actions taken when the final recommendations come out from the reports?
I think you have hit the nail on the head. So as business, you have said all the 1,438 mentioned individuals must be charged, convicted, sentenced, and they must serve time. Because this report took 4 years, 400 were called at the cost of R1 billion. The first volume alone is 874 pages. It came in 3 volumes. The first volume addressed SAA and its associated companies, technical services, South African Express Airways, and the catering company Airchef. The second volume looked at the new age by the Guptas. The last one is on our South African Revenue Services. And the preliminary findings were really damning, to say the least. It found the former president, Jacob Zuma, to have been dishonest and fled from accountability, that he was vulgar and calculated in betraying his people, that he helped the Guptas to capture the state, that he was front and center in colluding with the private sector to intentionally capture the South African Revenue Services. As to our once glorious movement, the African National Congress, Zondo Commission said the ANC benefited from the proceeds of corruption, that it abused the government tender system, that it did not care or slept on the job or had no clue what to do, and that this government did nothing to stop the decline of state institutions, that there is perversion of the procurement processes and interference in the appointment of senior leadership. There is corruption linked to political party funding, saying that it is a matter of extreme concern that the evidence given at the commission establishes a link between the corrupt granting of tenders and political party funding. Such a link can represent an existential threat to our democracy. It is inconceivable that political parties should finance themselves from the proceeds of crime, and yet there is alarming evidence to that effect. That there was state security agency involvement, that its resources were used to aid state capture, and non-existent legislation was used to, among others, illegally vet SAA executives that led to 7 of them ultimately quitting. That there is state almost complete failure to prosecute corruption cases involving violations of the Public Finance Management Act. The report further on directs police to probe kickback claims against former Transport Minister Dipuo Peters, former Joburg Mayor Jeff Makubo, twice asked for and received donations for the ANC before contracting for services for the city. That the Guptas used porn to milk state-owned enterprise and state-owned companies.
So it's very obvious. It's very obvious, Prof, from what you're laying out, that the Zondo Commission, as you said, which has been in effect since 2018, has done extensive work and has proven the links between what is now a criminal enterprise and almost a criminal cabal and mafia with those in power. But that's not the only area the president mentioned, and I want to get into electricity now. So the president said the problems with South African economy were both deep and structural. He said where electricity supply cannot be guaranteed, companies are reluctant to invest and the economy cannot properly function. We know that Eskom has unfortunately been the proverbial bone in the throat of the South African economy. But aside from hearing that Eskom might be basically disbanded and broken into 3 parts, with this particular State of the Nation address, what did the president say was going to happen with the electricity sector?
You see, electricity is the fourth means of production, because without electricity, nothing can function. You don't even have the power to propel the water from the reservoir to the homes of residents, which is the next crisis that is looming and is going to hit South Africans. As if it's not enough that the issue of land has not been addressed almost 28 years into democracy in another 2 months, the issue of Eskom has always been known to have been really the albatross hanging around the economy's neck. That now we needed to break it into generation, transmission, and distribution, 3 distinct entities. In and of itself, I think it will help. But the fundamental problem is that the money that needed to be used for Eskom has been stolen. We are the only country in the world that chose to build 3 generation units, the biggest in the world, Medupi, 9.6 gigawatts, and Ingula, which is hydroelectric power, but also Kusile, also another 9.6 gigawatts. But the initial budget of almost 30 billion went up to 54 billion, and there were no consequences, because this ANC-led government then chose to be a shareholder in Hitachi in providing the boilers. So, of course, there was a perverse incentive. But amongst other things that the president now realizes must be done as a matter of urgency is to address this issue of decent jobs, of transformation, of law enforcement, because without the law, who and what are we? But also to fix the more than 740 state-owned enterprises and state-owned companies. Eskom is only one of them.
Yes.
There's also the issue of reducing government debt because it's unaffordable, and then reduce public sector wage bill because it was allowed to run amok to levels now where probably 70% of what we collect from the South African Revenue Services go only to 3 pots: public sector wage bill, social security, and for servicing debt. And then the last 2 for me is about reimagining education, because education is the shortest way in which, if you are a black South African born in absolute poverty, you have an opportunity to transcend social classes. And of course, a social security net. Sometimes we talk about universal basic income grant.
Yes.
We call it BIG for short. It needs to be implemented only if it is affordable, if it is acceptable, if it is competitive, and if it is credible. Yes, my sister.
We get that. All right, so Prof, there was something surprising. Well, maybe not surprising to us, because we've had a conversation about this growing industry on the African continent in the past few months, but it might have come as a surprise to others who were listening to President Cyril Ramaphosa, and that was the mention of the medical marijuana industry. Now, the president made mention of the country's growing hemp and cannabis sector, which he said could create more than 130,000 new jobs. What are the plans on ground for this sector? How viable is it for South Africa? Were you even surprised that the president brought this up in the State of the Nation address?
No, I wasn't surprised at all. In fact, I was surprised that it took him so long, because the Eastern Cape's economy is known to have been dependent on growing and marketing cannabis, on hemp, and all its associated products. If there's one technical competence that already exists in the Eastern Cape, it is cannabis, and it's been going on for decades. We are simply regularizing it. When the economy is in doldrums, you look everywhere where you can get help. Even our neighbors like Lesotho. I mean, Lesotho is far ahead of us in commercializing, in legalizing, but also in legislating and regulating and ensuring that it is codified in law, the trading of cannabis. And one of the things that I think the president absolutely now regularized is to say, let's see whether out of this we can create a global industry that can add to our global competitiveness indeed. But most importantly, you know there's a link, my dear sister, between growing economies and the availability of spectrum. So for 15 years, we've been talking about digital migration. We've been talking about the auction spectrum on 5G. 6 ministers later, only now the presidency says it's about time that we executed on this. In fact, during the course of this week, the last of the analog switches was turned off so that we can meet our own United Nations Millennium Goals in making sure that we access the most effective and efficient 5G spectrum while still being environmentally friendly. And back to you, my dear sister.
Okay, so I have to mention this sector because there's no way we can talk about how South Africa is planning to recover economically without talking about the tourism and hospitality sector. And it was hit very, very hard by the pandemic and the lockdowns, as well as the restrictions in the country. This sector employs over 2.3 million South Africans and is the second highest employer after personal services. It's also a very private sector-led sector. And the president emphasized that it is now time for the private sector to drive job creation. So what does government need to do to make it easier, as we say in Nigeria, or create an enabling environment for the private sector in South Africa to thrive so we can get more South Africans back into the job market?
It is sad, tragic, and regrettable that such a treasure has been absolutely decimated by the pandemic, where 75% of the 2.3 million people that are employed are actually women. And we know that when you put a smartphone in the hands of women, not only does the nutrition of the health, education, and general well-being of their own kids improve, but that of the entire society and the community from which they come. We have always said that the country that can say we have defeated this coronavirus first will be the one that reaps the pent-up global tourism demand first. In South Africa, tourism matters because pre-COVID, we had 10.2 million people coming to visit our shores. This represented 9.8% of the national GDP. And we know that we have the potential to probably increase that tenfold because we are the only country in the world and the continent that can say to any tourist, whatever you need, we have it here in abundance. So I think the sooner we open up this tourism sector, we've got entire cities like Sun City here, where that whole industry just closed. If you come to Sandton, the Michelangelo, not only did they put chain around the front door by the fountain, but actually a padlock. I think it's absolutely sad. And the president, together with his cabinet, has figured this out. And as business, we are prepared to roll our sleeves to make sure that we accomplish that sooner rather than later.
All right. Prof, we don't have time, so I'm going to ask you this final question. And if you can give me the answer in 2 or 3 sentences, I would appreciate it. So President Cyril Ramaphosa has another 2 years at the helm of affairs. South Africans will not vote again until 2024. Another 2 State of the Nation addresses to give, and you and many others have said there was somewhat of a marked difference in this State of the Nation versus the previous ones. But how much progress do you really think the president can make? Are you optimistic as to the things that have been highlighted this year, that there will be significant progress in the areas he highlighted by the time the president is addressing South Africans once again next year?
When we have signed the new social compact, this is within reach in 2 years. And we have set ourselves 100 days to reach and finalize that compact. Because as I conclude, my dear sister, you know, a child that is not enveloped by his village will burn it down in order to feel its warmth. We saw that during the July looting, where young people who are not gainfully engaged and employed did exactly that. Lastly, I think one thing that the pandemic taught us is that when fisher women can't go out to sea, for whatever reason, they repair their nets. What are we doing as a people with great natural endowments to repair our nets? Because we know that whatever minerals the world needs, in Africa, you get those minerals as number one, at the very least, number two. Have a wonderful afternoon. It's been an absolute privilege talking to you. Thank you, my guest.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Professor Bonang Mohale. We hope to have you again on Business Edge. And the conversations, of course, focusing on the continent's most industrialized nation will continue. So have a pleasant afternoon. He's off the line already. 34.9% unemployment. And if you followed us throughout last year, you would know that more South Africans have decided not to even look for work. So it's not just about employing those who are out of jobs and giving better employment to those who are skilled, but also convincing more South Africans to go back to the job market. The president has his work cut out from him, but the State of the Nation address last Thursday has laid out an interesting plan and objectives, as well as the areas of focus. And we'll be watching to see what happens next under the Cyril Ramaphosa administration. You're watching Business Edge. Up next is NC4 to watch. And on a Monday, none other than the February 14th, the very famous one, we have our eyes on a very few number of stories for you. We start with an international one that has many concerned. There are growing tensions over Russia's military buildup near Ukraine, and this is leading to gold rising amid demand for havens and concerns over potential supply disruptions. Gold's appeal as a store of value is being burnished by risk aversion in markets and a huge surge in inflation worldwide, with prices gaining in the biggest advance in almost 4 months, even as the Federal Reserve in the U.S. gears up to raise prices. Oil prices rose on Monday, climbing towards their highest levels in more than 7 years on fears that a possible invasion of Ukraine by the government in Moscow could trigger sanctions from U.S. and Europe and disrupt energy exports from Russia. Brent crude futures hit $95 a barrel, with 73 cents there as well, up 1.4% after earlier hitting an intraday high of $95.91. Now, U.S. WTI crude rose 1.6% to $94.59 a barrel after hovering just around 94.92. Saudi Arabia transferred an $80 billion stake in Aramco to the kingdom's sovereign wealth fund, boosting its assets ahead of plans to tap debt markets for the first time. The transfer from the government will bolster the fund's strong financial position and high credit ratings in the medium term, adding that the fund relies on the value of its assets and the returns on its assets under management for its funding strategy. And finally, we end where we started. South Africa published proposed changes to the Electricity Regulation Act that will facilitate the opening of the national power grid to private generators. The state-owned Eskom has been the dominant supplier of power to Africa's most industrialized economy for nearly a century. Legal impediments to transmitting and trading electricity have limited production by independent producers, contributing to a supply shortfall of at least 4,000 megawatts. And that's it on Business Edge for today, keeping our eyes on a number of very big business stories right now. The situation on the border of Ukraine and Russia will lead to a number of business fallouts, particularly with the crude oil price. Stay with us throughout the day, and of course, we'll have all the latest information for you. From here on the continent and from around the world, I'm Tolulope, Adeleru-Balogun. Have a fantastic day.